everyone and welcome to Instant Biology by Dr. Neela. I am with you again with a very important topic, and you might be knowing that we have already started a playlist on the chemical interactions between the atoms, and in that playlist we have already talked about the basically covalent bonds. So as you know that this playlist would be in English, and we would be talking about the ionic bonding in today's lecture, and this lecture would also be in English. I have already posted a video in Hindi on the same topic, so if you are more comfortable in Hindi, then you can watch up that video in the basically basics of biochemistry playlist in Hindi. So now, without wasting much time, let us start with chemical interactions, and today, as I've said, we would be talking about the ionic bonding. And what is ionic bond basically? Now understand that suppose there are two atoms, there are number of ways in which they can interact. Okay, so let me just start with a rough drawing, and so that to make you familiar with what I'm trying to say. Suppose this is one atom and this is another atom. So there are two atoms you can see, and these two atoms can be or can interact with each other in number of ways. So for instance, the interaction can be of covalent nature, can be of ionic nature, can be of van der Waals nature, can be of hydrogen bonding nature also. But we have already discussed, or I have already told you about the two types of major types of bonding depending upon the bond strength. So if I talk about the classification of the bonds depending upon the bond strength, then you can say that the bonding can be of two types depending upon the bond strength. If the bond strength is very high or the bond is very strong, then this is one type, and if the bonding is weak, this is another type. Okay, so if the bonding is strong, then often we say that the bond is of covalent nature. And if I'm talking about the weak interactions, then we can say that weak interactions can be of numerous types. For example, ionic bonding, for example, hydrogen bonding, for example, van der Waals bonding, for example, the hydrophobic interaction, so on and so forth. Or dipole-dipole interactions. There are multiple types of interactions that come under the weak bonding. So in today's lecture, I will be focusing upon the first weak bonding, and that would be ionic bonding. So let us start. So coming to the first slide, what is ionic bond and how is it formed? Let us start with this. So if I'm saying about ionic bonds are formed because of the transfer of electrons. When I say transfer of electrons, what do I mean? When I say transfer of electrons, I mean that the electrons will be transferred from the donor to the recipient. Now suppose this is one atom and this is another atom, and I'm saying that this is a donor and this is a recipient. So the electrons will be transferred from the donor to the recipient. This is the concept. If you remember, in case of the covalent bonding, we were saying that the electrons are not transferred. The electrons were shared in case of the covalent bonding. They were not transferred. But in this case, in the case of ionic bond, we are saying that the electrons will be transferred. And let us say that because of the transfer of these electrons, one of the species will be positive charge and the other species will be negative charge. What do I mean by this? So positively charged ion can be formed and negatively charged ion can be formed. What does this mean? Understand this, that in case of any atom, if I'm talking about any atom, and the atom has not taken or given off any electrons as of now, then the number of protons is equals to the number of electrons in that atom. Okay, so number of protons and number of electrons inside an atom will be same. If they are same, then the atom would be electrically neutral. So when the number of protons and number of electrons are same, the atom would be electrically neutral. But In case of the ionic bond, the electrons are given off by one atom, and that is called as donor. Now, if I give off some electrons, if one atom gives off some electrons, then definitely the protons would be higher in number than the electrons. Definitely, if the electrons are being donated, then the number of protons would be higher than the number of electrons. Definitely. Now, if the number of protons are higher than the number of electrons, then this particular ion will be called as positively charged. This ion would be called as positively charged because the number of protons are higher than the number of electrons. This will be positive charge. On the contrary, if we are talking about the atom that has accepted the electrons, definitely the number of electrons would be higher than the number of protons. In this case, the atom can be negatively charged. Okay, so I believe you would have understood that when the ionic bond forms, one atom would be of positive charge nature, one atom would be of negative charge nature, and that we call as ions. So if I am talking about the positively charged ion, this is called as cation. If I am talking about the negatively charged ion, then I refer to it as anion. Okay, so I believe you would be clear about the terminology. Positively charged ion, cation. Negatively charged ion will be called as anion. Okay, so often students have a problem in remembering this. So what you can do is negatively charged ion. Okay, so negative starts with N, and over here also you can see anion is also having a N. So you can easily remember this, cation and anion. I hope this is clear. Let us move on to the next point. Ionic bond exists due to electrostatic attraction. Now, what does this mean? Why will ionic bond take place, or why would the ionic bond form? The ionic bond would form because of the electrostatic attraction. I've already told you that there would be positive charges and there would be negative charges. Now, these positive charges and negative charges will be interacting with each other. Why? Because these two are opposite charges, and we know that opposite charges attract. Okay, so when the opposite charges are attracting, an ionic bond would be formed. So the ionic bond is existing because of the electrostatic attraction. So electrostatic means because of the ions. Okay, because of the electrical property that they are having. So electrostatic attraction between the cation and anion. So I hope this is clear. So one cation was formed and it was positively charged, one anion was formed, it was negatively charged, and they both were interacting because of the opposite charges present on them. Next, can form if the electronegativity difference between them is. Now let me introduce you what is the concept of electronegativity difference. Electronegativity means the property of an atom to pull an electron towards itself. Okay, again let me tell you this thing again, that what is electronegativity? Electronegativity is the property of an atom to pull the electron towards itself. That means more electronegative is the atom, more will be the property to pull the electrons towards itself. For example, fluorine is a very highly electronegative atom. You can say that fluorine has the highest property to pull the electron towards itself. Again, nitrogen, again oxygen, these are very highly electronegative atoms. If I am talking about hydrogen, example of hydrogen, I mean hydrogen is an electropositive atom. It does not have the property to pull the electron towards itself. Okay, so this is electropositive. Now, since you have understood what is the concept of electronegativity, you should be able to understand that if the difference between the electronegativity is very high, the difference between the electronegativity is high, then the chances of ionic bond formation will become higher. Let me show it to you that if the electronegativity difference between the two atoms involved is large, so I have written this point also, you can see that if the electronegativity difference between the two atoms that are involved is large, for example, metals and non-metals. What do you know about metals and non-metals? If I give you an example, for example, sodium. Sodium is a metal, and non-metal, example, chlorine. Okay, so you might have studied this numerous times, that sodium chloride, NaCl. So Na is an example of metal, and chlorine is the example of non-metal. So they can combine together, or they can join together to form the ionic bond. Understand this, that metals are generally electropositive in nature. They do not have the energy, they do not have the capacity to pull the electron towards itself. So they have a very, very low electronegativity. But if I'm talking about the non-metals, for example chlorine, for example fluorine, for example oxygen, they have a very high electronegativity. So the difference between the electronegativities between the two atoms over here is pretty high. It is very large. Okay, why? Because the sodium has very less electronegativity, chlorine has very high electronegativity, so difference between them becomes very high. Therefore, it leads to the formation of the ionic bonds. Now, understand this with the help of a structure of sodium chloride. Understand this. So, if I'm talking about a sodium atom, now you might know that sodium, the configuration of sodium is 281. How many electrons are present in case of sodium? The total number of electrons are 11. So, the configuration becomes 2, 8 and 1. In the outermost orbital, there is only one electron. So, the sodium wants to attain the stable gas configuration or the inert gas configuration, and it attains that by donating this electron. I have already said that one atom would be donating the electron, and henceforth it will become the positively charged or the cationic species. So, it will donate one electron and it will become positively charged, or it will become the cation. If I am talking about the chlorine, now chlorine is a non-metal. Okay, now it has in its outermost orbital 7 electrons. So chlorine has in its outermost orbital 7 electrons, and in order to attain the stable gas configuration or inert gas configuration, it requires 1 electron. Why? Because in the inert gas configuration, an atom requires 8 electrons in its outermost orbital. So since it is having already 7 electrons, it requires 1 more electron, and where does it get this 1 electron from? It gets it from the sodium. So sodium donates 1 electron and it is received by chlorine. You can see that over here 1 electron is received by the chlorine atom. Because of this, the chlorine becomes negatively charged, sodium becomes positively charged. Now there are these two charged species are present. One is cationic and one is anionic. Because of the opposite charges that are present over here, electrostatic interaction or electrostatic attraction occurs between them, and therefore this is called as ionic bond. Over here you can see that sodium chloride is formed and ionic bond is formed. Now electrostatic interaction can be positive, can be attractive also, can be repulsive also. Now this is clear cut, right? Opposite charges attract each other. Now if I say there is a chlorine atom and there is another chlorine atom, let us say, though both the chlorine atoms are highly electronegative and they might be having negative charge also. If they are having negative charges, both the chlorine atoms will not approach each other and they will repel each other. So in this electrostatic interaction would be of repulsive nature. So however, I am not going to talk about that as of now. I am talking about the attractive nature, and I have already explained it through the sodium chloride. So opposite charged species will interact through an attractive force, and and the same charged species will interact with a repulsive force. This is quite obvious. One more important thing I would like to bring to your notice over here is that whenever a species is positively charged or negatively charged, or let us say exact charges are not present, even if a partial positive or a partial negative charge is present, then also that particular species will be soluble in water. Why am I saying that? Polar species or charged species will always be soluble in water, because water itself is a polar solvent. That means you might have heard about the saying that like dissolves like. That means since water is a polar solvent, water will always want to dissolve something that is polar. If I take the example of sodium chloride, in sodium chloride you know that sodium is positively charged, chlorine is negatively charged, so therefore there is a charged aspect to this sodium chloride. So whenever it will interact with water, it will be completely dissolved because it is charged. Even if it is not charged, let us take the example of glucose. In case of glucose does not have any charge, yet it has a partial positive and a negative aspect to it, because there are multiple hydroxyl groups, OH groups. Since there are multiple hydroxyl groups, obviously the oxygen will be having partial negative and hydrogen will be having partial positive charges. And when I'm saying partial, I want you to understand that these are not the exact positive and the negative charges. These are partial because let us say that there is a polar interaction, polar covalent bond that is existing. So I've already explained this kind of interaction in case of the covalent bonding. So there is a polar covalent bonding that is existing, and because of the polar covalent bond there is a partial positive and partial negative aspect to the glucose. However, let us come back to the sodium chloride thing. So I believe you would have understood this concept. Let us move on to the next slide. If someone wants to calculate what is the force of attraction, yes, what is the force of attraction when it comes to the ionic interaction? So the force can be calculated as 1 upon 4 pi epsilon into Q1 Q2 upon R square. Now this is basically a constant value. Q1 is the charge, first atom's charge, Q2 is the second ion's charge, I should refer to it as ion, and R is the distance between them. Okay, so epsilon of water, now epsilon is a constant value and it basically depends upon the nature of the solvent. So if I'm talking about water, epsilon of water is equal to 78.5 and epsilon of acetone is equal to 20.7. So you can see that the force actually is inversely dependent upon the epsilon. If you keep everything as constant and you are just changing the solvent's nature, that means in one case water is present, in the next case acetone is present, you will understand that the force of attraction will be inversely proportional. That means in case of water the force of attraction will be less, whereas in case of acetone the force of attraction will be more. Why? Because of the inverse relationship between these two. Let us talk about this. So electrostatic interaction between dissolved ions are much stronger in case of acetone, as I just told you, as compared to that of water, because force is directly proportional to 1 by epsilon. Okay, so I hope this is clear, and this is the formula through which you can calculate the force of attraction between the two species. Okay, so this was all about the ionic interaction. I hope you would have got a clear picture about this particular topic. And if you have liked the video, just hit the like button. Do not forget to subscribe the channel and also share it with your friends. Thank you so much, and stay tuned with the next lecture on this particular playlist, and that would be hydrogen bonding. Have a good day.